All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack a version of human history that I guarantee you were never taught in school. This is all based on Yuval Noah Harari's incredible book, Sapiens. And just a heads up, this isn't just a story about the past, it's a story that's going to make you question, well, pretty much everything you think you know about being human.
So how in the world did we go from being these sort of insignificant apes to, the rulers of the entire planet? We're going to trace that journey through 5 huge turning points. First, we'll have to face our dark past as ecological serial killers. Then we'll expose the agricultural revolution for what it really was, history's biggest fraud. We'll uncover the surprising secret behind the scientific revolution, find out how capitalism and empire were built on a shared fantasy. And finally, we'll have to grapple with our kind of terrifying future as we evolve from animals into actual gods.
To really get our story, you have to zoom out. I mean, way, way out. For almost all of our 2.5 million years on Earth, we were nobody special. Just another animal hanging out somewhere in the middle of the food chain, minding our own business. And then, in what is really a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, 3 huge revolutions, the cognitive, the agricultural, and the scientific, they just catapulted us to the very top. And in doing so, we changed the fate of every other living thing on this planet. Okay, so let's get into our first big revelation. And it starts not with our strength, but with a really shocking and long-buried family secret. This simple question just shatters our whole modern view of ourselves. We are so used to being the only humans on Earth that we've completely forgotten a fundamental truth about our past. We weren't always alone. We used to share this planet with our siblings. I mean, think about that. For the vast majority of human history, the world was this incredible, diverse human landscape. Over in Europe, you had the big, burly Neanderthals. In Asia, you had the mysterious Denisovans. You had Homo erectus roaming for nearly 2 million years. And on a remote island in Indonesia, you had the tiny, hobbit-like Homo floresiensis. The planet was teeming with different kinds of humans. And then, poof, they were all gone. By about 12,000 years ago, only one species was left standing. Us. So you have to ask, what happened to them? Did they just fade away? The evidence, according to Harari, points to something much darker. The argument is chilling. Wherever Homo sapiens showed up, mass extinction followed. We were, in effect, ecological serial killers. I mean, when our ancestors got to Australia 45,000 years ago, nearly all of its giant, incredible animals vanished. When we crossed into the Americas, same story. And our closest relatives, the Neanderthals, they disappeared pretty soon after we moved into their neighborhoods. So what was our secret weapon? It wasn't bigger muscles or sharper spears. It was a revolution that happened inside our heads. A random genetic mutation basically rewired our brains, and it gave us the power of complex language. But here's the crucial part. It wasn't just about being able to say, "Look out, there's a lion." For the first time, we could also say, "The lion is the great spirit of our tribe." This is our unique superpower. It's the thing that separates us from every other animal. This ability to create and believe in fictions and stories is what allows us to cooperate on a massive scale, right? You can't get 100,000 chimpanzees to build a pyramid because they can't all believe in the abstract idea of a god or nation or human rights. But you can unite millions of humans under the banner of a country or a religion or a corporation, all things that are just stories we've all agreed to believe in. Now this is where it gets really wild. This slide reveals a stunning parallel. A modern lawyer and an ancient shaman are basically doing the same job. The shaman weaves these powerful stories about spirits to bring the tribe together. The lawyer, on the right, weaves equally powerful stories about things like corporate law and limited liability to create something like the car company Peugeot. I mean, what is Peugeot? It's not the cars or the factories or the employees. It's a legal fiction. It's a story that exists only in our shared imagination, but it's a story so powerful it allows thousands and thousands of strangers to work together in an incredibly complex way. And these shared fictions, they didn't just help us cooperate. They also created social hierarchies. At a 30,000-year-old burial site in Russia, archaeologists found 2 children buried with, get this, 13,000 ivory beads and all sorts of other treasures. The adults buried nearby, they had almost nothing. Now, there is no way those kids could have earned that status. It's crystal clear evidence that even way back then, we had invented concepts like inherited wealth, or maybe they were royalty or had some kind of religious importance. Ideas so powerful, they determined who was treated like a king. So our ability to create these fictions led us to our next great invention. But as we're about to see, this wasn't some huge leap forward for humanity. In fact, Harari calls it the single biggest fraud in human history. I mean, we've all been taught the same story, right? Agriculture was the stroke of genius, the dawn of civilization. We settled down, we grew crops, and life got better. The thing is, the archaeological evidence tells a very, very different and much darker story. When you actually look at ancient skeletons, the truth is shocking. Hunter-gatherers, they had a rich and varied diet. They actually worked fewer hours and were generally healthier. The first farmers, on the other hand, they lived on a single nutrient-poor crop like wheat. Their bones show all the signs of back-breaking labor, slipped discs, arthritis. They were shorter, they were sicker, and they were trapped in these crowded, filthy settlements that were just breeding grounds for epidemics. And here is the really mind-bending truth of it all. We think we domesticated wheat, but in reality, wheat domesticated us. Seriously, think about it from the wheat's perspective. It went from being just another wild grass in a tiny part of the world to becoming one of the most successful plants in the history of the planet. How? It tricked Homo sapiens into clearing land, pulling weeds, and dedicating their entire lives to its survival. We gave up our freedom to become servants to a plant. Okay, but the story gets even weirder. Over in Turkey, there's this incredible, massive 12,000-year-old temple called Göbekli Tepe. And here's the crazy part. It was built by hunter-gatherers before they even started farming. This just turns our whole understanding of history completely on its head. It suggests that our desire to build this huge religious center, this imagined order, is what forced us to settle down and start farming, just so we could feed all the workers. It's entirely possible that religion created agriculture and not the other way around. You see, as our societies got bigger and bigger, we needed bigger and better stories to hold everything together. Just look at these two documents. On the left, you have the Code of Hammurabi from ancient Babylon, which says that the gods created a strict social hierarchy. On the right, the American Declaration of Independence, which says that nature created all men equal. Both claim to be based on some universal, objective truth, but in reality, they are just powerful fictions. Neither inequality nor equality is a biological fact. They're just stories we tell ourselves to create a stable society. For most of history, we believed that all the important knowledge in the world was already out there, written down in holy books or passed down through ancient traditions. Then, about 500 years ago, everything changed. A new revolution began, and it was based on a single, really radical idea. This is so important. The scientific revolution wasn't a revolution of knowledge. It was a revolution of ignorance. It was the moment we, as a species, finally had the courage to admit we don't know. Instead of just blindly following what the ancient texts said, we started to question everything. We began to believe that new knowledge could be discovered, and that the universe was just full of secrets waiting for us to unlock them. And this slide just captures that shift in thinking perfectly. Christopher Columbus was so convinced that the Bible's map of the world was complete that he went to his grave insisting he had reached Asia. He simply couldn't admit his ignorance. Then, just a few years later, Amerigo Vespucci sailed to the same lands and had the guts to say, you know what? I have no idea where we are, but this definitely isn't Asia. And that simple admission of ignorance, that's why two continents bear his name, and not Columbus's. Before the scientific revolution, our ignorance left us completely helpless. Just take King Edward I of England, one of the most powerful men in the world at the time. He and his queen had 16 children, and he had to watch as most of them died from diseases he couldn't understand or do anything about. All his power, all his wealth, was completely useless. The only thing he could do was pray. Now let's fast forward to 1744. A group of Scottish ministers were worried about what would happen to their families after they died. But instead of just praying, they did something revolutionary. Step 1, they admitted their ignorance. They said, we don't know the future. Step 2, they gathered data, birth and death statistics. Step 3, they used mathematics to calculate the probabilities of when they would likely die. And with that new knowledge, they created the world's first life insurance fund. They had replaced prayer with probability, and it gave them the power to actually predict the future. This brand new ability to predict the future, when you combine it with another powerful new story, would soon unleash the forces that literally built the modern world we live in today: capitalism and empire. And that new myth was credit. See, for most of history, people basically assumed the future would be about the same as the past. There was no real idea of progress. Capitalism is built on the absolutely radical idea that the future will be better than the present. And that belief in progress, that's what allows us to borrow money against our future earnings, creating this huge pool of capital that can be invested in new projects today. But this new system, well, it had a dark side. In the early 18th century, this financial genius named John Law convinced the French government to back his Mississippi Company, and he promised them fabulous, unimaginable wealth from the New World. Based on nothing but trust in this amazing future, a massive financial bubble was created. People became millionaires overnight, at least on paper. And then the bubble burst, and it brought the entire French economy crashing down with it. It was a really harsh lesson in the destructive power of our own fictions.
And here is where things get really, really dark. Capitalism didn't just create businesses, it built empires. The conquest of much of the world wasn't carried out by kings and queens, but by private companies. The Dutch East India Company, for example, funded entirely by private shareholders, had its own army and its own navy. It could wage wars, sign treaties, and even execute people. It conquered Indonesia and ruled it for 200 years, all in the name of profit. The line between a business and an empire had been completely erased.
And that brings us to today, and to the final and by far the most profound revolution in our history, a revolution that could very well be our last. For 4 billion years, every single living thing on this planet has been governed by one single blind force: natural selection. If a gene helps an organism survive and reproduce, it gets passed on. If it doesn't, it disappears. Everything, from the smallest little microbe to the largest dinosaur, has been shaped by this one simple process.
But today, right now, that 4 billion-year-old rule is being broken. For the first time in the history of life, a species is about to escape the grip of natural selection. We are on the verge of replacing evolution with intelligent design. Not the design of some god in the sky, but our own.
And this isn't some science fiction, distant future thing. It is happening right now. Scientists have created a rabbit that literally glows in the dark by inserting a jellyfish gene into its DNA. They have grown a human ear on the back of a mouse. We are gaining the power to create and destroy life, powers that for all of history we attributed only to the gods. We are becoming the masters of our own evolution. For thousands of years, we were at the mercy of famine, plague, and war. Now, we are actually on the verge of conquering them. Our next goals are even more audacious: immortality, eternal happiness, even godhood itself. But as we acquire these godlike powers, we are confronted with a truly terrifying question. We have become the masters of the world, but we have absolutely no idea what we want, and there is nothing more dangerous than a dissatisfied God who doesn't know what he wants.